Hello everyone, and welcome to tonight's meeting of Wharfdale Naturalists. I hope you can hear me. I don't usually wear the headset that I've got on at the moment, so I'm just trusting that it's working. Linda, I'm assuming that you'd be shaking your head or something, or waving at me if I wasn't audible. So I take it that I am. Great. It seems like a very long time since we had our last webinar, even though it's only a fortnight. I think we've got used to that very kind of intensive schedule that we had in January, where the meetings were virtually weekly. I think perhaps they were weekly in January. So it seems like ages since I've been here. It's nice to be back. Lovely, once again, as it always is, to watch Anne's introductory slides. What a lovely taste of the joys to come in the season ahead that was. So thank you very much again, Anne, for those lovely slides. And tonight we are very fortunate to have as our speaker Linda Jenkinson, who's someone I'm sure that many of you will already know and have heard speak before, perhaps. Certainly anyone who's interested in birds in our region is likely to have come across Linda in one capacity or another, I'm sure. Linda is a biologist. She's a bird watching guide. She's also founder of the Leeds Bird Fair. In her spare time, she co-manages Leeds Swifts and she rehabilitates grounded swifts. And she's a member of a UK network of swift conservationists. And tonight she's going to be talking not about swifts, but about wildfowl and wader migration. And the talk is called Exploiting the Freezing Niche. So Linda, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Just share the screen. There we go. Is that okay? Thanks everybody for joining us today. I've done this talk a few times, but I was just saying earlier that it's really changed quite a bit since I first started to look at wildfowl and wader migration. I'm very, very passionate about the Arctic areas that we're going to talk about today, but unfortunately I've never been able to go. I've not had the money to go, and I've not had the time. And I'm aware that some of you out there will have been and seen some of these areas that we're going to talk about today. So I'm hoping we'll have some time at the end so that you can share your experiences about these wonderful places. So I'm not a massive expert on migration. Obviously, I teach as much migration as I can when I'm doing my classes, but there are some fantastic resources out there which I'll go into later if you're more interested and you want to learn and you want to look at some of the migration maps. So when we talk about migration, we obviously talk about spring and autumn migration, don't we? And at the moment, we've got all our winter migrants here, but in only a very few weeks, probably 3 or 4 weeks, we'll start to see our spring migrants arrive. So the first ones generally are things like sand martin, ring ouzel, wheatear, and we'll be eagerly awaiting them and have first chiff-chaff singing, of course, which always is around the March the 9th, although climate change is pushing that earlier. And then we tend to just completely forget about all of the other things that have been here over the winter. We've got until probably April before our winter migrants leave for the north. But we're always so eager to see all of the migrants coming in from southern Europe and Africa, and to get our first chiff-chaff, our first willow warbler, see the first seabirds coming in, that we then forget to record sometimes when was the last time that we actually saw a barnacle goose, or the last time we saw a widgeon or a redwing if we're in local areas around here. But you know, that information is very important, and lots of recorders are really keen to know when people have seen the last birds. but we just generally see them moving away from us, don't we? And then most of us don't really give them another thought. But hopefully after tonight, I'm going to make you think about it a little bit more. So we've got lots and lots of birds that are going to be gradually leaving us. I'm just wondering whether that's I don't know whether my screen is showing the bar at the top. Hopefully it isn't. I'll just pretend it isn't, and you can tell me if it is.
It isn't, Linda. It's just got the winter visitors slip away unnoticed, Hedda.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Okay, so all of our winter visitors generally are leaving at night. Most birds are traveling at night, in fact, and on clear nights, so that they can use the stars and the magnetic field in order to be able to make their journeys. And many of them are traveling in stages to get to where they want to be. But one of the telltale signs that we have that wildfowl are moving is that they start to do these head flagging movements. So you might see them shaking their heads, doing a little bit of wing flapping, and it's generally because they're getting ready to move. And you'll see similar head shaking if there's a predator around as well and they're about to fly. And this, it ripples through the whole of the flock, and you see more and more birds doing it. But once it starts to get into late March, early April, then you might start to see this kind of behavior. And it's a prelude to them maybe not being there the following day. So they're generally moving at high altitude, and that helps them avoid turbulence, and that's wind turbulence, of course, and any obstructions. And one of the most fantastic things that people have been doing recently is that they've been recording the sounds of birds moving at night with very sensitive sound recording equipment, which I don't think is that expensive by all accounts. And you can set them up in your garden, and you can hear all kinds of things going through. And there's a massive library of information on Xenocanto of night flying birds that you can match your sounds to as well. So if you fancy having a go at that, then that will open up a whole new world for you. I know quite a few people have been doing it around Leeds, and they're picking up all kinds of movements during the night of birds moving across the country. So that's something maybe you might want to think about another time. So we know that we've got departing swans, don't we? These are the largest birds that we've got, so it's normally quite obvious when they've gone. And so the largest bird that we have is hooper swan, and all of our hooper swans come from Iceland, and you can see a little map there of them of moving up to Iceland, that small pink dot. But hooper swans are present all the way through Scandinavia and across northern Russia and Siberia. But they tend to use a different pathway, and it's only the Icelandic ones that generally come to us. Not that we would know every single swan and where it's come from unless it's got a ring on it, but from lots and lots of data, we know that our hooper swans come from Iceland. And the small Buick swan, that comes in a totally different direction. So that one's coming from northern Russia and Siberia. And we only have about 1,200, 1,300 of those in the UK, and numbers are dropping quite dramatically of hooper swans. And there's quite a lot of research, Buick swans, quite a lot of research going on at the moment as to why that's happening. And as we're going through the talk as well, we'll be able to see why that may be so. And the hooper swan population is massive in comparison, as you can see, with about 27,000 birds coming into the UK. So we also have migrating geese, and the largest population of migrating geese that we have in the UK is pink-footed geese. And I had a massive flock of 300 go over my house in the middle of Leeds just a few days ago. They're spread pretty much all over the country in small groups, but most of the ones that we see flying over are going down towards the Wash, where we get enormous flocks that roost on the wash at night, and then they go into the beet fields during the day in North Norfolk. And if you've been to North Norfolk, you will have had that fantastic experience of them all flying in at night. And if you've actually gone to somewhere like Snettisham early in the morning, then you will have seen them take off en masse as soon as the sun rises, which is absolutely fantastic. I do urge you to do that if you fancy a winter trip down to Norfolk. But pink-footed geese come from Greenland and also Iceland. So we have populations here and in Ireland. And in the same family, the answer family, we also have white-fronted geese. These are split into two groups. We have some from Greenland, which normally hang around in Scotland. And then we have a population from Arctic Russia that comes in generally to southern England. Those are the ones that go to the Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust place, and they use washes. Slimbridge, I'm thinking of course. And a very, very small amount of bean geese arrive in the UK as well, only about 500, if that, some years not as many as that. And we get Tundra and Taiga bean goose. So we'll talk about those a little bit later too. And in the black geese family, the Branta species, the migrating geese mainly are all the barnacle geese. So we have 29,000 barnacle geese, and they come from northeast Greenland and Svalbard. So the entire contents of Svalbard all go into the Solway Firth. And they're really currently struggling at the moment because we've got lots of bird flu, and I think probably nearly 5,000 geese have died in the Solway Firth this year, which is very, very sad. So challenges all the way. I'm showing a little picture of a duckling there, of a gosling there, and because some of you may have seen some of the behaviour of barnacle geese on the TV, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, but absolutely cute little things that have an amazing start to their life. We also get about 133,000 brink geese that come into the UK. And again, we've got different races. We have some that breed in northeast Canada and others that breed in Arctic Russia. And because these birds are spread around a large geographic area, then you have lots of morphological differences between them. Same with wading birds as well. So you will be able to see different types of geese. And initially, when you first start in bird watching, of course, it's hard enough just learning one species, but when you've got different races to look at, then it gets even more difficult. But it's always a challenge, isn't it? And as you increase your knowledge of birds, learning about different races and scanning through every single goose or every single wader to get as many different species as you can is something that's I find really pleasurable. So we've got lots of departing ducks. These are birds that we just take for granted in the winter, probably about 400,000 widgeon, all dispersing to Iceland, Scandinavia and northern Russia. Birds we don't see so much, things like common scoter, and that are off the shore, they all disappear up into northern Europe and northern Russia. We have a good population of goldeneye. Our nearest breeding goldeneye are in Scotland, of course, around Speyside. But others disappear up to Northern Europe, Asia and North America. So I'm not going to repeat all of these species because it's roughly all the same story for every single bird, basically. They're all going to the same particular area. And something like smew is slightly different because they're using slightly different habitats. And we'll go on to these later. So a massive list of birds. Departing waders, things like golden plover. We don't just have the golden plover that are on our hillsides. We've got about 300,000 that disappear off into the north. And then things like grey plover, which all breed around Russia and Siberia and North America. So that bit stretches across through Siberia and over into Alaska. You'll see on the map. Lots and lots and lots of different species there. and birds we don't see so much, things like purple sandpiper as well. They have wonderful breeding grounds in Greenland and Iceland and Scandinavia. So moving on through these departing waders. Oh, I just mentioned that some of them, we have one or two, we don't have numbers so much of birds that are spending the winter with us, but we have large numbers of passage birds, and we never quite know when they're going to turn up in various places. So things like whimbrel and wood sandpiper, we get in reasonable numbers, but they're generally passing through and moving through us and going into Europe. So we don't always get definite numbers of birds that are staying. So let's have a look at these flyways. You'll notice in the middle, the East Atlantic flyway. You can just about see the map of the world underneath. And the East Atlantic flyway is our flyway, and that stretches over into the east, into eastern Canada. So west from us into eastern Canada, it takes in Greenland, Iceland, and comes down into southern Africa. And then you can't see the line so much on the other side because it overlaps with quite a few different flyways, which is why we get some good birds in challenging weather. But at the top, it moves all the way across northern Russia towards the Tamar, and then it loops back, taking in northern Europe, and then down sort of towards East Africa, probably going across the Congo and down to South Africa. So you can see there that it's a massive set of countries that our flyway covers. And there are other, when we're talking about wader migration as well, there are a few birds that are breeding in the Arctic area that use some of these other flyways. So this is our usual view of the world, isn't it? We just see, we've got Britain smack in the middle, and then we can see the Americas on the left, and we can see Africa, and then Europe on the right. And then the area that we're going to talk about is barely visible. So I've got a really nice map here of the Arctic. And there you can see that when you look at it from that direction, that there's not a massive amount of space between them, is there? It just looks like everything is really, really close together. And it makes you understand really why the birds that we're talking about are spread over a really, really large, you know, they look like they're spread over a really large area when you look at a flat map, but when you look at the pole that way, you can understand why they would easily spread around. So that you can get things like dunlin going all the way across, things like bar-tailed godwit going all the way across, and you can get Brent geese in Canada and also in northern Russia. So it makes it easier to understand when you see it like that. And when I was mentioning before about the different races that you can get, when birds spend a long time in a different geographical area, they're slightly different morphologically. So for instance, things like Greenland white-fronted geese, they've got orange legs and an orange beak. And the European white-fronted geese, which are breeding around northern Russia, and they've got orange legs and a pink beak. So you get slight differences between them. Okay, so this map is showing what the habitat spread is like. So in that same area that we were looking at before, only this map that I've had to find puts America in a different spot. So if we're actually just to the left of Greenland and a little bit north of Greenland from that perspective, if you can see what I mean. But what it's showing is the amount of forest and the amount of grassland and tundra. So the brown areas around the edge are all areas of tundra. And then the dark green around the outside of the circle is the boreal forest. and that's taiga forest. That's what taiga is. It's Taiga and not Tiger. And the grassland in between is mainly very rough grassland, and obviously there'll be some farming in between there as well. But you can see that Greenland is mainly covered in ice most of the time. So the green areas around the edge, and you can see the brown tundra areas around the periphery. And those are the areas where the birds that we're talking about will be. Okay, so I'm just going to show you some close-ups of the places where our birds are disappearing off to. So on the left-hand side, you can see eastern Canada, and it's made up of lots of tiny little islands and land masses and peninsulas. Some of them are slightly mountainous, and then all around the edge there is tundra and coastal marshes, and there is some forest, of course. And between the tundra and the forest is where you get the end of the tree line, and then you get very sparse trees as well. And some birds are using that as their main habitat. And then on the right, you'll see Greenland. And as I just mentioned before, it's mainly glacier. And so all around the edges, it's quite high, and it slopes down quite steeply towards the sea. There's a lot of birds that actually use this land around the edges, but you can imagine what a difference it's going to make if we lose some of this ice. So this is Iceland. I don't know how Iceland got named Iceland and Greenland got named Greenland, because it should be the other way around, really, shouldn't it? Because most of the time, if you look at the weather as much as I do, you'll notice that Iceland, the temperatures in Iceland are very, very similar to Scotland most of the time of the year. And it can be quite green. But you can see from this map, can't you, how many inlets there are, how many rivers there are. And it's just absolutely fantastic for breeding birds. Lots and lots of areas that are really useful, and all around, all those little sea lock areas as you're going around the coast as well are fantastically sheltered for birds like merganser and divers. And you can imagine, can't you? Oh, I've never been, and it would be lovely to be able to go, but I'm sure some of you got some fantastic stories of what you've seen there. And then this is Svalbard. So this is where all the barnacle geese come from that go into the Solway Firth. Very, very similar sort of terrain, isn't it, to the edges of Iceland and the edges of eastern Canada. And lots and lots of inlets, little sea locks, and quite a lot of tundra around the edges as well, but quite mountainous in some areas. Now, there's definitely countries that some people have never heard of. This is Franz Josef land. Again, it's made up of lots and lots of tiny, tiny islands. I think it's the largest archipelago that there is in the whole of the world. And all these islands are inhabited as well. There's lots of little settlements around. And I think the largest one is the Wildfowl land, which is towards the right there, and Graham Bell Island. But lots and lots of coastline, because it's made up of so many tiny islands. So you've not only got the mountainous area, a little bit of foresty area and tundra, but you've also got masses of coastal Arctic coastline. So I think the highest point on there is 2,034 feet, but most of the land is about only sorry, I missed this little bit here. Most of the land is about 980 feet, 300 meters. It's going from metric to old money, isn't it? That makes it difficult when you start to get all your stats together. So I don't know whether you know this bit as well, but it's shaped a little bit like Italy, I think. And it's above the northern Russian coast on the Barents Sea. And it's Severny Island, and you can see that. So it's Novaya Semya, I think it's called, the archipelago, and very mountainous on the north end. And there's a little strait going through the middle of it, and the south end is more lowland with lots of tundra on there. And this is northern Russia. So you can see there just in the Barents Sea, the piece of land that I was talking about a few minutes ago. You can see Svalbard to the left at the north there. And you can also see Franz Josef land there. So our birds on our flyway tend to be in the middle point, which is the Tamar. Our flyway extends to the Tamar. And so the birds that are on the east side of that, on the west side of that, fly down our flyway and come to the UK. And the ones on the other side tend to use a different flyway. So that's generally the cutoff point for our birds that are breeding in the north. So there's fantastic maps that you can look at if you're interested in following some of the different species. And so the bottom left-hand one shows hooper swans and the backwards and forwards movement from Iceland into the UK. And of course, these are point-to-point ones because the hooper swans travel in one journey all the way from Scotland over to Iceland. And of course, when you're seeing these point-to-point maps as well, it's from ringing recoveries, so you can only draw a straight line anyway from a bird having a ring put on it and a bird being recovered at the other end. So every time you see those straight lines on any migration map, it's because it's from a ringing recovery. And that's been the only way we've been able to track migration up until now. But of course, some birds now are being fitted with data loggers and other birds we're able to satellite track. So you can see Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust map in the middle of the light-bellied Brent geese that go from Ireland all the way up to eastern Canada, going across Baffin Bay through Greenland and Iceland. And so these have been tracked and they've got some fantastic data about how they're moving and where the staging points are as they go from one country to another. And this is fantastic information because it allows you to be able to put the conservation money into particular areas, and it knows where which areas are most at risk and any extra work that needs to be done with conservation organisations in other countries as well. So it links everybody together, and technology has been able to do that wonderfully, hasn't it? And the right-hand map is from a fantastic book called Time to Fly. I'll show you it here even, Time to Fly, by Jim Flegg. And it's a BTO publication, and that one gives you some fantastic migration maps for lots of different species. And lots of fantastic text as well about migration. And you can also get plenty of information from the BTO website. There's some on the RSPB website and a Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust site. But there's a fantastic blog by Graham Appleton called Wade Details, which tells you so much information about wade and migration. And it certainly will keep you busy for quite a while reading that. So one of the fantastic stories that we've learned from tracking waders is the Alaskan race of bar-tailed godwits, and that one has been found to go in staging posts initially on the spring migration You can see the yellow line and staging posts where it goes. But on the outward migration in the autumn, it's actually doing an 11,000 kilometre non-stop flight across the Pacific Ocean. So that's the longest continuous journey that's been recorded for any land bird. And it's following the East Asia Australasian flyway by doing that. But so that's just absolutely amazing, isn't it? And you can see the red at the top of the graph, at the map there, it shows you where these birds breed. And so some of these other birds are going to be going down our flyway. So the ones on the far left-hand side will be going down our flyway. But the ones that they've done, that they've tracked in Alaska so far have performed this fantastic migration feat. It's just absolutely amazing, isn't it? I can't imagine what that must be like. And I was doing a little bit of reading about that, and I mean, I know you probably know that outside the breeding season, a bird's sexual organs shrivel up and they don't need to use them whatsoever, and then they gradually, as the day length increases, the sexual organs increase in size. Well, I was reading about the bar-tailed godwit, that even their gizzard and part of their digestive system also shrivels up when they're making this magnificent journey. So there's lots of biology as well involved in some of these migration stories, and we'll probably learn lots and lots more as technology advances. So let's have a look at some of the places where these birds are going. We've looked at the maps, haven't we? So we've got some idea of the countries that they're visiting, but this is the actual habitat. So this is tundra, the Tundra Biome. And tundra means a treeless plain in Finnish. And it comes in two types. So there's a lowland tundra. So this is the bit that you get all around the edges of those islands, and vast quantities of it in Northern Europe, in Northern Russia and North America. And it covers around 20% of the Earth's landmass, but that also includes the tundra that you find in alpine areas as well. So there's a lowland tundra, and then there's a similar sort of habitat at the tops of mountains. So we have that kind of thing in north of Scotland, don't we? We even have a little bit of that. And the bottom layer of the tundra is permafrost. So that can extend down about 1,500 feet underground. And so it's only the top bit that is awakened, if you like, during the spring and summertime when our birds disappear up into the north. So, but what can happen is they can arrive too early. And what we're talking about is the season for these birds not starting until late May, early June sometimes. It's a very, very short season. So that's why they're not leaving us until April, because they're going to gradually make their journey northwards. And there's no point in being up there too early, because if they get there when the snow covers the ground and the ground is still frozen, they're not only not able to breed, but of course not going to be able to feed themselves and keep their fat reserves either. So if they do arrive too early, if the weather's a bit strange, then they can reverse migrate and come back southwards, but not all the way to us, obviously, but they'll go somewhere where it's slightly warmer and they can feed. But looking at geese when they're flying around, it's obvious that they're not using up all of their fat reserves to get to their destination. They generally still got a third left when they arrive at their destination. So they're actually feeding up enough to have some fat left over when they arrive, just in case that they have to sit out a hard night, or if they need to reverse migrate. But, if they arrived too late, if the season's too late, or for some reason the birds arrived too late, then of course it's not too long before the freezing conditions start again in the north. So they only have a very, very short window to be able to raise a brood. And if they are late and they hang around too long, then lots of birds will have left. And in the staging posts where the birds are gathering on their outward migration, then there might not be enough food left for those birds that are still breeding late and are moving on later. So it's a very, very tight time to be able to put in raise a brood and do everything that you need to do. Just a few short weeks. So in the tundra then, once everything's perfect and they're in there, this is the kind of avifauna that you can find there. And obviously there are other types of birds as well, as some passerines there, but we're talking about geese and waders today, and wildfowl generally. So we can get things like European white-fronted geese there. We get bean geese, and obviously these are the tundra bean geese. And so they're in open land like this in a treeless habitat. And in the small pools in the tundra, you'll get things like long-tailed duck, and you get things like red knots and pink-footed goose, and the tundra swans, of course, the Buick swans, which we now call tundra swans. And also in around the areas, the pools around the tundra area is things like scorp and red-necked phalarope as well. So next to the tundra then, as the green line, do you remember there was a deep green line around on that map that we could see of the habitats? We have the Taiga or the Boreal forest. And lots of the birds that leave the UK will use these forests. And so things like smew, they're one of the amazing birds. They're using old black woodpecker holes. So very similar to our mandarin duck and our goosander that nests in tree holes. Smew also nest in tree holes, and they're using the largish holes that a black woodpecker makes. And it would be absolutely fantastic, wouldn't it, to see a beautiful smew sticking its head out of one of those holes. But you can imagine with the size of the forest, that would be very, very difficult to find. Then we also have things like tiger bean goose, and tiger bean goose are also nesting around the trees in the Taiga forest. So not just on the edges of the forest, but within the forest itself. And also on the pools and rivers and streams in the boreal forest, things like scoter and velvet scoter can be found. And wood sandpiper, green sandpiper and greenshank also like this area. And then the bit in between where the tree line is giving way to the tundra, then we have birds like widgeon on the small pools and the bar-tailed godwits, and they actually like to nest sometimes at the foot of the trees as well. And then, of course, we've got the Arctic coasts, and so all of those tiny little islands that you saw in each area, every one of those has got a little bit of coast around it, hasn't it? So there's so much coastal habitat for these birds. And the birds that like the coastal areas, especially where there's things like eelgrass for the Brent geese, is things like sanderling, purple sandpiper, turnstone and little stint. So they prefer those little coastal marsh areas. So why do the birds go up here in the first place then? Well, you would think that they need to stay somewhere warmer or somewhere where, you know, they're not going to have to rush to finish their breeding season. But it's because, you know, with almost 24 hours of daylight, there's an abundant supply of food. There's lots of feeding opportunities because it's very quiet up there. It's not very well populated and well developed. There's so much food, mainly insects, lots of plant food. And of course, it's easier to see the predators because it's wide open space, and that's safer for chicks. And also, if you think about the wildfowl, when they go into their molts, they molt their flight feathers all at once. So it's much safer for them to be somewhere where there's very, very few predators, and it's easy to see them approaching. So lots and lots of insects, very, very specialized ecosystem of insects and plant communities. And so the insects, they're absolutely amazing, because if you can imagine their life cycle, to complete their life cycle, then they need to not die, do they, when it freezes. So in order to survive those winters, they've got 3 different kinds of strategies. So they either have to be tolerant to freezing, so they have to get rid of all of the water in their body, or they have to produce chemicals to prevent the water from freezing inside their body, or they can actually survive having ice in their body. So there's all different types of methods of survival for different types of insects, but different stages as well can live for over 4 years at a time, and they can withstand things like -30 and even up to -60. Some insects can cope with. So it's absolutely incredible, isn't it, how these animals have evolved to use these habitats. And the plants as well are highly evolved, because they have root systems that don't go down too far as well, and they grow very quickly in 24-hour daylight, and they have particular types of leaves that allow them to not to freeze and the cellular system break down when everything, when the temperatures really, really drop. So fantastic specialized ecosystem. And as I mentioned, very few predators. So things like polar bears in some areas, you can see them there going after the guillemots. And things like Arctic foxes, red fox, snowy owl, and obviously skuas as well. And so what I was trying to think of was the one in the corner, which is an ermine, and all of these make up the predators that would affect the geese and the wading birds on these habitats. Okay, so there's lots of threats of being up there. So there's lots of benefits, but the threats are that similarly to when birds are going down towards Africa, they're getting hunted during migration, and they get hunted in the winter feeding grounds in the UK. There's potential for developments at vital staging posts, which is why all the data we're getting from tracking some of these birds is giving us some vital information for future conservation projects. There's issues about drilling for oil and gas in the Arctic, which would cause lots of pollution and development around the industry, and lots of unknown issues in the current chaotic situation that we have politically as well. And I've left the climate change one to last, because obviously that is going to be a massive issue for the Arctic area. Such a fragile ecosystem, and things like fire, rising sea levels, carbon and methane production are going to massively affect this area. So just put a little diagram on here about what happens, what the threats are. So we've got lots of higher temperatures due to temperature rising, heat waves, difference in the sea currents that are going to affect the temperatures in the seas, stronger storms, there's going to be more drought, there's more fire, and the glacier is melting, and that's going to cause more sea level rising, warmer oceans. The plant communities and insect communities will completely change if this happens. So you can see structurally things will change as well. So the glaciers will become thinner. As you get warming, you will get an advancing tree line and shrub line, and you will get drying out of vegetation. And you get this little thing called a thermocast, which you can see at the bottom and slightly to the right. That's when you get the permafrost collapsing and thawing, and then you get the ground sinking underneath it. And also there'll be iron deposits moving into the streams as well. Lots of fires. You will have heard that there were lots of fires in the Arctic, especially last year. And all on the left map, you can see all those dots where fires were detected. I think that was late 2019 was that map. And I think since then there's been a lot more in Greenland as well. But you can see how many individual fires there were. That was over a 1 month period. And the diagram to the right just shows you what happens when there are fires. And so normally caused by lightning, and they hit the boreal forest, and that continues to burn. Then it gets into the peat layer. And as you can see with that red section underneath, then the fire just spreads underneath the peat, starts to dry out the permafrost and the water table. And then gradually over a year, it can come back up to the surface and start a fire elsewhere. So really, really serious implications for that. You will have heard about the drilling for oil and gas. Well, you can see in this middle section there in the Arctic Ocean, that's owned by Denmark, Canada, United States, Russia, and Norway, but the white bit is unclaimed, and people are already starting to argue who's going to have that. And there's going to be a lot of issues about trying to develop these areas. So you can imagine the amount of pollution that is going to cause, from digging, from putting in the drills, and then of course from any pollution which is inevitable if they do drill for oil in there. So we've got a lot of things to worry about in the areas. These are things that we just hear about on the news, and it seems so far away. And of course we don't, people mention it's pristine environments and we don't want anything like that happening there. But of course we don't think about all of our birds that have been coming into the UK and what that means for them. So all of these birds that you're very, very, very familiar with in the winter in the UK are all up in these areas, and they're going to be drastically affected by climate change and all these other things I've mentioned before. So climate change alone is really going to sadly affect many of our birds. So we've got this fantastic wilderness picture up here, haven't we? But how long is that wilderness going to last? Nobody knows that, but I can tell you already that the sea level is already starting to rise, which is affecting the coastal Arctic areas where many of our birds are breeding. And how soon is it going to happen is the other thing, isn't it? So with all the things that are happening around us at the moment, we know we've got the fires, and we know we've got the sea level rises already. And we know we've got changes in sea currents and the compositions of the seas, which is going to affect the plant life around the edges. I'm not going to go around the whole of that wheel because I'm best you be absolutely upset by now that we've got this massive issue going on for every one of our birds that leaves the UK in the wintertime. And how many, because of this, are going to come back from year to year. So please give our wintering birds a lot more respect now. They've got a lot going on for them when they leave us in the spring. And I'm very much hoping that we can stop the decline that's inevitably about to happen. And we can keep our geese and our waders and all the rest of the birds that make their way to the Arctic. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Linda. It's just astonishing how far some of these birds can travel on a single load. That one about bar-tailed godwits being able to carry enough energy to go 11,000 kilometers is just miraculous. Got one or two questions in, if people would care to put any more into the Q&A, please, rather than in the chat. The first one was about, early on you talked about the recording the sounds of birds at night on migration. How quiet do the surrounds need to be? Is it something most people can do, or do you need to be out in the middle of nowhere to be effective?
Well, it seems to be successful in the city. I know quite a few people have been doing it in their gardens and picking things up. And, you know, and I live just 2 miles out of the city centre, and I'm not doing the nutmegging yet, but I can hear things like the redwings going over very, very easily when they're calling in the autumn. So I can imagine that you'll be able to pick up quite a lot of sound in the middle of the night. And people are definitely doing it in the garden in the middle of Leeds.
Oh, I might have to give that a try. Thank you. Do any of the waders sort of stay on territory? Because there are places I've seen, like the North York Moors near the coast, where you can see lapwings that you sort of think are wintering when they're there in the winter, but also as a breeding territory. Do some stay put, or is that likely to be a different population and they're all migrating?
Is it? I think relatively recently birds have been staying, because we've had about 6 winters where it's been very, very warm, haven't they? I mean, this is the warmest winter I've ever known. I mean, I know that I haven't seen the figures for it yet, but I've never experienced a winter as warm as this. And the last 6 years, lots of our waters have been empty. When you go down somewhere like St Aidan's, the water is empty, whereas before it used to be full of birds, you know, wherever you used to go. And it has been mentioned that the short-eared owls that we normally get at St Aidan's could be the ones up near where you're talking about, because that they are still hunting up there now. So I think it's just because the winters are getting warmer that they're staying there. Is this something that you've seen relatively recently, or is it?
It's recent years rather than over
recent
decades.
years. Yeah. I think it's because of climate change already that we're starting to see an effect here.
And what are the main sort of advances that are telling us more? Is it in the sound recording, or is it more tagging and understanding the migration routes more, or other things that we've not heard of yet?
It's being able to do the tagging, because then you can get all the data about the route as well, whereas before it was just ringing and you were only able to get the point to point then. You know, so you're picking them up on their journeys as well, but you're still only able to draw straight lines from that, whereas you know, with satellite tracking and with the data loggers, then you're able to pick up a lot more information about their journeys.
Okay, thank you. Just a couple of specific questions before we hand back to Helen. You mentioned kind of methane emissions and, you know, in the tundra. Does that have any effect on the birds at all, or is it up and away?
I don't think anybody knows. I don't think anybody knows, but it'll have an effect on plant communities. So that the methane in itself, I don't think anybody knows, because you get these plumes coming up of methane. It just suddenly bursts out, and I don't know how heavy that is as a gas, but the changes will be in the plant communities and the insect communities associated with that as well. So if our birds have, you know, evolved to spend their summers up there, feeding up there, then there's bound to be a knock-on effect from the plant and insect communities.
Indeed. And a couple that are more rhetorical, I think, rather than real questions or just observations. One saying it's why does the RSPB have the word protection in its name when it seems mainly to recount their decline, which they would probably argue the decline would have been faster without them, but comment if you wish, Linda. I'm not sure that's a question for you.
No, I'm not sure, but they do a hell of a lot of work protecting birds, and lots of research on bird journeys with other like the BTO, British Trust for Ornithology, and Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust as well. They all work together to conserve species and to gain as much information as they possibly can of migration routes and the areas that they're spending their breeding seasons.
And then finally, a comment from someone who's been to the Faroes and seen that the warmer seas have already moved herring shoals further north. So they've been replaced by mackerel, and that's resulting in silent cliffs in recent breeding seasons, which is, I need to think of another question because I really don't want to finish on that note before I give back to Helen.
But it is a sad picture, isn't it? And there's no getting away from it. You know, I mean, while I've been thinking about tonight's talk, I've just thought, well, we need these messages, and I know we're preaching to the converted here, aren't we? Really, we're all like-minded, and we all try to do our best. But you know, it really is a climate emergency. And, you know, we think of it in terms of how it's going to affect us, don't we, as a human population, but there's going to be a lot more effect on the birds that we're very, very used to seeing. So, you know, these birds that I mentioned today, these are birds that we just watch on a daily basis when we're out. And they're all going to be struggling before too long.
Yeah, perhaps we all need to do what we can on the climate crisis and reduce our use of pesticides and things. So there are insects when the birds are here to fuel up and so on.
That's right. That's what we can do, and supporting the organisations that are trying to do something as well. And you know, I was mentioning it would be lovely to hear from anybody who's been to any of these areas. But of course, you know, I don't particularly go because I don't like to fly. Because of the climate issue as well. Yes. So I may never get a chance to see these birds in their breeding habitat because I'm trying not to fly.
Yeah. That's been excellent, Linda. Thank you. I'll pass you back to Helen to sum up now.
Okay, thanks.
Well, thank you so much, Linda, for that incredibly informative and fascinating talk, which I think has probably really made us all think about where our wintering birds go off to when they leave us for the summer. I'm an absolute glutton for maps, so I particularly enjoyed all those fantastic maps of parts of the world that perhaps, you know, the maps that we normally look at, as you said, marginalize. You know, we don't really look at maps of the Arctic very often, and we don't, I mean, Franz Josef Land, when you put the map of Franz Josef Land up, I had to think, oh, where is that? I mean, I sort of have the vague idea it's somewhere up north, but I had to disappear to do a bit of Googling when that came up to find out exactly where it was. Really, really fascinating stuff. And yeah, like Jeff, I was also, I mean, who could fail to be astonished by the fact about the bar-tailed godwits and how far they're able to travel in one go. I was reflecting, actually, I bought an electric bike recently, and the person who sold it to me was very pleased that the electric bike was going to be able to go 100 kilometers on one charge. But we got a long way to go, haven't we, before our technology is going to match the technology that's built into the bar-tailed godwit.
I know, it's incredible, isn't it? Absolutely amazing.
Just astonishing stuff. And of course, you left the talk on a sober note. But I think you're quite right to say, where else is there to leave it at the moment? You know, we have to think about what each of us can do to improve the situation for our birds, or they're not going to be coming back to us for all the years that we hope they're going to be coming back to us. So thank you for those messages too, because, you know, we do need to keep hearing them, however upsetting it might be for us, because otherwise the worst will happen. The only way we can prevent it happening is taking those messages in and acting accordingly. So many thanks indeed, Linda, for a wonderful talk, which has been very inspirational, I'm sure, to all of us. In
I hope I haven't
illustrating
you all too much.
Well, these things are always a mix, aren't they? Because the reason we're depressed at the end is because of how wonderful and amazing the things that you've shown us in the earlier parts of the talk are, and how precious. So although the end is depressing, we've got to put it in the context of the wonder that nature provides for us, and the joys. So thank you very much. And I should say before we end that our next talk is going to be, I think it's the 22nd of February, which must be, yeah, thank you, Jeff. It's going to be, yeah, fortnight's time on British mountain plants, history, status and future. And that's going to be by John Birks, who's Emeritus Professor at Bergen University. So we can look forward to that. And actually, it won't be me. I was going to say I'll see you in 2 weeks' time. I won't, because I won't be able to do that introduction. But somebody, hopefully Jeff, perhaps somebody alongside Jeff will do that introduction. And I will see you the time after that. So have a good evening and see you in more or less a month's time. Bye.